scare your kids with that, right? They come back before dark, or else the boogeyman will get you.
Hey, this is Unrefined Podcast. I'm Brandon Spain, your host, with co-host Lindsy Waters. Welcome to another episode. Welcome, you guys. We're back to another action-packed episode. We have an awesome author here. But before I get into who he is and what he's done and what we're going to talk about today, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Lindsy.
Hey, guys. Ready to get into this one.
And my other co-host, the incomparable, the rock himself, other than Jesus, Kenny Seay.
Woo, yeah.
All right.
And his Lego figure.
My Lego. That's it.
And our guest, who we approach our podcast like this. When you're a guest in our podcast, you're in our living room, you're in our home. So this casa is your casa. So I'd like to introduce Sebastien Richard, who goes under the pseudonym for this book we're going to be talking about of Kyle Steele, which I'm just going to front load you, man. It's an awesome book. It really was. I've read different books, but it was really, it kept me going. It kept me interested. And anyway, it was phenomenal. So
Thank you so much.
yeah. So give us a little background, Sebastien, about yourself and interest and what got you interested in this, and anything you want to tell us about you that you want everybody to know. How about that?
Yeah, okay. Wow. I'm going to try to boil it down. I don't want to be too lengthy.
We got time.
I was born again at 9 years old. Came from a dysfunctional family background. I had very difficult teen years, early 20s, very difficult, lots of depression. We had a difficult, I had a difficult upbringing. We moved around a lot. I was bullied in high school, all kinds of stuff. But one thing that remained the same was my relationship with Jesus Christ. That actually kept me, I believe, sane throughout these difficult years. In my 20s, I was fortunate enough to meet a 1 in a million woman, my wife, Elizabeth. We got married. I was around 28. She was 21. But it's funny because when you get married, you think, well, I've arrived. I'm married now. It's like we're going to build something solid. But you don't expect to go through a wilderness experience. You don't expect a lot of growing pains, a lot of difficulties and trials and all kinds of stuff like that. Early in my marriage, maybe a couple of years into my marriage, I met a guy at a supper. He was a Christian. We went for a supper with friends of Elizabeth's from Bible college. And I'm sitting across this guy at the table, a very nice guy. And he leans into me. And you know how sometimes when we get into fringe stuff and we're in our early years of fringe conspiracy theories, we get super enthused, right? And we can like freak people out by talking about this as if we're talking about, I don't know, what do you prefer, Coke or Pepsi kind of thing? Oh, he leans into me and and I'm just like Baptisty Christian, as Baptist as you can imagine, right? And he leans into me and says, do you like George Bush? I go, oh yeah, he's a Christian. He says, no, man, George Bush is a Satanist. And then he starts to expound to me all of his knowledge. And I'm at this supper and I'm sitting across this guy like, okay, he sounds crazy. And yet I know that Elizabeth would not befriend a crazy dude and he's her friend. So maybe there's something to what he's saying. Meanwhile, I was like struggling with everything he was throwing at me. But being the type of person I am, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, I began researching some conspiracies here and there. And I quickly became very interested in what I was finding out, because back then, believe it or not, the internet was not censored and it was awesome. So we could research anything and find really, literally anything we wanted about a certain topic. And that got me going down the rabbit hole. And I was roughly 30 years old. So I'm 49 now. So I've been going down the rabbit hole at irregular intervals, I should say, because at some point I was too deep in and it was affecting my psyche. You know, when you go too deep sometimes, the Lord pulls you back up and says, come and get some air. Come and get some air. So I came and I got some air, and then he brought me into other good stuff like personal growth, leadership, developing my leadership. I joined the John Maxwell team. He brought me to other layers, other lanes of theology. So then I began, after I joined the John Maxwell team, and I became a certified coach and leadership expert. I started writing books. So that's when I began writing books. I was pursuing more personal growth, personal development, learned a lot there. And actually, that's when the Lord decided to bring my wife along with me. And we founded Thriving on Purpose, which was our basically our organization. In the beginning, it was more personal growth and leadership with a little bit of faith sprinkled, but eventually it became more faith-based. I was like, you know what? I just can't do personal growth and leadership without bringing Jesus into it. So that's what I did. And Elizabeth joined me, and then we began podcasting, and then we began broadcasting, and we built our YouTube videos, and I wrote more books. So and all the Siege Simeon Heights, that was my 9th book. It was my first work of fiction. Everything else was nonfiction prior to that. The other book that I'm known for more, if you would go on Amazon, is Kingdom Fundamentals, where I dive deep into the kingdom of God.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, exploring the ramifications of the kingdom of God and helping people to get out of religion and into the kingdom, and a kingdom understanding and their walk with Christ, walk with God, and so on and so forth. So that was what I was doing prior to writing this novel. Now let's talk about the novel, if that's okay with you guys. I'm just going to give you a little background. Yeah, how that came about. Well, as you would guess, you know, being someone who was much into fringe theories and conspiracy theories and all that, I had some interest in Bigfoot. It actually came from my wife. My goodness, I would go back probably some like 18, 19 years ago. When I was starting to delve in these conspiracies, she was like, hey, you know what? You're delving into all that kind of stuff. But some of it she didn't really like. Some of it she did. And she said, I'd like to know more about Bigfoot. Do you think you could research that? And I was like, yeah, sure. I'd love to research it. So I did a little bit of research on Bigfoot at the time. I found it very interesting, but it didn't hook me. I would say it really hooked me about 6 years ago when some podcasts about cryptids began multiplying on podcast platforms. And the one that really hooked me was Sasquatch Chronicles.
I follow them. Yeah.
Oh, man, I love Sasquatch Chronicles. And I listened to hundreds of episodes because at the time I was working for the post office and I was sorting a lot of mail, and they allowed us to use earbuds and MP3 players while we worked.
That's cool.
So I did that for years and years and years. I would use my earbuds at work, and I listened let's say an 8-hour shift. I'd probably listen to 6 hours of content every night. And I'm not just talking cryptids, but all kinds of stuff. Some were sermons, some were audiobooks, others were obviously conferences, teachings, you name it. I mean, I would just saturate my mind of all kinds of stuff that fascinated me at the time. But for a long time, I would enjoy listening to Sasquatch Chronicles and other cryptid podcasts. And that's where I got most of my immersion into the subject of Bigfoot and fascination, I have to say. And one such story was on Sasquatch Chronicles, and it was called the Siege at Hunubia. It says Hunubia, but it's Hunubi. It's pronounced Hunubi. It's in Texas, I think. And it was a story of a guy who had moved into a house, and there was Sasquatch on the property. And the story really hooked me. I was like, man, this story would make an amazing movie. Because I often think cinematographically. So, and then you guys read the book, you probably
Yeah.
as you were reading, probably saw the scenes in your mind, because that's just the way I am. Like I see it in my mind first as a scene of you would watch on the screen, and then I put it on paper. And then I had that story in the back of my mind, but I hadn't listened to it for like in 5 years or something like that. So it's just bits I remembered from that story and from other stories as well, other accounts, other things that happen to a lot of people, because like I said, hundreds of episodes. So you got all these tidbits that you go and get, and you say, oh, I'm going to put that in the story. I'm going to put that in the story. So it's based on true accounts. But of course, I kept the people. I didn't mention any names or anything. And it's like an amalgam of different accounts and encounters that people have had that had been shared on those podcasts. So the final result was the siege at Simeon Heights, which Simeon Heights is a fictional place. It doesn't exist. It's in Oregon, but it doesn't really exist. I came up with it. I thought it was pretty clever.
Thought you did a good job of kind of capturing that terror, if you will, and otherness of the encounters that people have with Sasquatch, including just kind of seems like you said a lot about not only the smell, but kind of the disorienting effect the smell had.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm remembering this correctly, you suggested that that's something they can even like kind of turn on and off. I thought that was an interesting idea.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting
that
idea.
comes from the accounts you've heard?
Yeah,
Like
some people think that they can actually control it, and I've heard that, and I thought that made sense, because not everybody who's encountered a Sasquatch or Bigfoot says, "Oh, the stench."
Right.
Some people, I think they, and it's just a theory, because everything pertaining to Bigfoot is just a theory. I mean, there's
exactly speculation.
It would be funny in a conversation. Say I'm a Bigfoot expert. That's really funny because. Makes no sense. It's like an oxymoron, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, but the stench thing is, first of all, when they describe the stench, it's usually always pretty much like dead carcass mixed with urine in the heat of summer. Very fetid. I don't know. I'm French, so sometimes I can read words. I don't always know how they're pronounced. But FEPID.
Yeah, fetid. Yeah.
So and it grabs the people, and when they describe it, it seems overwhelming. But also, I think that it could be Bigfoot's way of saying, "You're on my turf. Get out now."
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they're pissed off, and then the glands secrete something.
Yeah. Pheromonish. Well, I have a question for you about dealing with that. But before we move on, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone who supports us as an unrefined friend in our online group. But the real stuff is happening in members-only community.
Yeah.
We are building a community of like-minded Jesus followers who desire to go deeper in the Word and link arms, staying alert, just being aware of these times.
Oh, yeah.
We have members-only bonus episodes, early access episodes, live Q&A, behind-the-scenes stuff. We also host podcast accelerator coaching and masterminds, which those are a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So come join us at unrefinedpodcast.com or find our link in the show notes after the show. Now, what were we saying? Was that a common theme in all the different stories that you had about the smell, that they would smell the smell?
I think it's fairly common. Like, it's not in every account, but it's in many accounts that I've heard. They describe that smell, and it catches people's attention, obviously, because you're fishing quietly, everything goes well, and then all of a sudden you smell that, and it overpowers you. You're like, well, what is that? And that even got Bigfoot's moniker in, I think it's in Florida. It's called the skunk ape.
Yeah.
The skunk ape.
Yeah.
So and all across the U.S., Bigfoot has different terms depending on the geography where you're at. Right. There's Bigfoot, there's Sasquatch, there's skunk ape, there's the boogers in other places. And boogers is interesting because I think it's based on the term that we use, the boogeyman.
Yeah.
We used to scare your kids with that, right? They come back before dark, or else the boogeyman will get you. And that could come from our distant past, Who knows? maybe people were aware of these creatures. I know that the Native Americans were, and they're very quite knowledgeable about these creatures. And maybe that's where we get these things from. And we don't even know. I mean, we use things all the time that we don't know what the origins are.
But did you hear a lot of in your stories you read or listened to or heard or whatever about the whole nature just getting quiet, like it's like still? Is that a common theme too? No birds, no bugs, no.
That's not just Bigfoot. That's any great predator, whether it's a bear or cougar, mountain lion, or even the pack of wolf. Nature is very smart. Animals are very smart. Even the smallest chipmunk. I mean, they're smart. You walk in the woods and you hear all of a sudden these chirpings like, and that's basically a squirrel saying, "Hey, there's a predator here. I'm giving a warning out." And we hear these things and we're like talking while we're walking in the woods and we don't really pay attention, but nature is very smart. So so they do that. Definitely the seasoned hunters, those are always the most fascinating accounts. Seasoned hunters, because they know nature, they surround themselves with nature year in, year out, and they're able to decipher, oh, something's off. All of a sudden it's silent, not even a cricket chirping. So they know something's present. Mm-hmm. And when it's a Bigfoot, they don't always see it because they're so good at camouflaging. And these seasoned hunters, they know how to spot what they're hunting for. So they can usually spot a cougar or a wolf or bear. But Bigfoot is really elusive.
Well, that's why I'm very suspect when people catch Bigfoot or even any kind of cryptid on a game camera, because they know, I think electromagnetically, this is my theory, that they know electromagnetically that there's something there, and they avoid it like the plague, you know. And so if like in the book at the end, that big, I think it was the alpha, or let him know that, you know, that he was he in other words, he showed himself on the camera. He didn't hide himself, and that was
exactly
important to the story, you know.
And I think Bigfoots, generally speaking, they're that smart. When you see them, they wanted you to see them.
Yeah.
I don't believe that it's accidental. Oh, I was lucky. I caught a Bigfoot. No, you weren't lucky. Yeah. He gave you that chance. He gave you that permission, or it, or she, or.
Well, and that brings into something that I want to go. You guys have, Lindsay or Kenny, have any questions you want to ask here? I want to go supernatural direction with this.
I got to tell you something. It's like, I'm interested to realize that you came into the Bigfoot thing a lot later in life for this to write this story. Because for me, I read a lot when I was a kid, but I remember being in 2nd and 3rd grade in the Scholastic book fairs, and there was always books that were like on, you know, these monsters, and it was Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and the Loch Ness Monster, and Mothman.
Well, I had a book like that when I was in 3rd grade.
Yeah,
it's called Monsters. On the cover, the words Loch Ness Monster.
Yep, I have that one.
You have the same?
I do. That's what, when you said that, I was like, that's it. Yeah. To me, that's the stuff that got me interested as a young kid. It's like, I mean, that's the coolest stuff in the world. It's like, you know, they're giving you these things, and, you know, it's already fantastical and kind of, you know, fantasy oriented, but there was enough reality of stories that you're like, I might see Bigfoot out in my woods as a kid. You know, it's kind of crazy. So it's cool to hear that come into it. I mean, and especially since you've never had a real actual Bigfoot cryptid experience.
And I'm not sure I really want one, to be very honest.
No. I agree, man. It's one of those things with it. I've had one.
Oh, I
actually have, and I'll tell you what. I'll just spit in here for a second, not too much, but I was, you know, a musician by trade. I would travel a lot at night. So one time in Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, I would take a shortcut to come across into where I lived. And it literally went up to it was a place called the Peaks of Otter in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And it was all these windy little roads. It's 3:00 in the morning. And I've got another guy in my band riding behind me. We're talking on the phone because we don't want to fall asleep. We're chit-chatting and stuff like that. And I come around a corner and I saw 3 Bigfoot-like creatures walking. They'd been walking across the road and they were going up a hill. And it was like a family. Like there was a big one, a middle one, and a tiny one. And when the guy behind me, I was like, I got past it and I'm in complete shock. And I'm like, dude, you got to look right when you come around this curve. And he saw it too. And I said, those weren't bears. He's like, those weren't bears, man. What was that? No idea. Nothing to take a picture or anything. It was like those corner of your eye. You come around a curve and there it was. It was like, oh. And you saw it and there's nothing there and you can't explain it. You can't, but 3:00 in the morning, I was sober, I promise.
And how dark was it? Was there some moonlight enough?
Well, you know what? There was some moonlight, and plus most of it was headlights. I was on a deep curve, and I'm going very slow because it was a very windy mountain road. So I'm coming around the curve, and there's my flashlight, my headlights on that thing, and I can see them going up the side of it. Just casually walking up the side, not running, nothing. It was basically like, we don't even care you're here. And there it was. So,
Yeah, because they heard you. So, yeah, they didn't care.
Right. It was like, I'm zipping by and stuff like that, but it still sticks with me. And I was like, I saw something. Well, I don't know what it was, but.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, my experience is not as obviously as awesome or as dramatic as Kenny's, but we have 80 acres that we live on. And there's a part of it where there was a cottage. We used to own a retreat center. And every time I was up at this cottage, see, I came into this by my 20, he's now 20, but he was younger then. My 20-year-old son had a friend who's a pastor who Nathan would come home and tell me, well, they talk to each other by beating, trees and all this kind. I was like, I don't believe that crap. That's, I don't do Bigfoot, I mean, I like the supernatural, but Bigfoot, really? And so he would come home from this friend's house with all this stuff, but I think I was encountering something because I know they're around in our area, and every time I would go to this one cottage to do a landscaping, to do weed eating or whatever, particularly when I was weed eating, I would get up there, and this is why I ask you about the silent thing, Sebastien. Everything would get quiet, and I always thought it was me, but it would get quiet. And I'd start weed eating, and it's behind. There's a big hill right behind this, and I got the strangest, eeriest sense that I was being watched. And I trust. I'm spirit oriented, and I trust our intuition. I think God gave it to us for a reason, and I think it needs to be Holy Spirit used. But I still think that our intuition can be accurate. But there was something intuitive. It was just like, when you're walking down the street and you feel like somebody's looking at you, you usually found out that somebody is. It was that same experience, except it was it wasn't dread, but it was really close to being like this, like, I want to get done and get the hell out of here. Okay. and so, boom, I would get it done. And then Sandy used to joke with me about it because Sandy's she's iffy about Bigfoot and stuff. But that made me start to listen to my son and his friend's pastor dad, who's a Baptist pastor, but he's totally into all this kind of stuff. And so that was my little experience. And I'm like y'all though, I don't want to experience one because I don't really know what they are, which leads into another topic we could either get to now or we can do later. What are Bigfoot, Sebastien? What do you think they are?
Brandon, your guess is as good as mine. I like it in Sasquatch Chronicles. He always ends with that question: what do you think Bigfoot are? And he always says this. He always says there's no right or wrong answer. And it's true. Because depending on your experience, depending on your background, what angle you've studied Bigfoot in, you're going to find information about Bigfoot being a spiritual being. There's some books out there about that document some really interesting cases about that. Personally, I think Bigfoot, that it's probably some sort of primate, North American primate that has a genetic link to human beings, either through genetic manipulation of some sort in the past or in the present. I don't know. Some people have espoused the theory that they're Nephilim on the earth right now. I used to think that was very probable.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much anymore, but still a valid theory. There's even an interesting account. I think it's Oh, Al Bielek of the Montauk Project.
Yeah.
I saw a video where he was retelling the story of how they were experimenting with the technology that they had experimented with the Philadelphia experiment, making that ship disappear kind of thing, opening portals and all kinds of stuff. And he was telling this account of how they were doing experiments. And at some point, something went awry. There was a problem. And there was a portal that opened in the compound. And a Bigfoot came through. A Bigfoot type creature came through and started wreaking havoc in the compound, and they had to contain it and so on and so forth. And that blew my mind. I was like, what? Like, what portal did they open to where?
Yeah.
And how did that thing come through? And what is it?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, all the questions that come popping. So obviously that's an interesting account. There's other accounts of people walking in the woods and feeling some kind of resonance in their chest after hearing a type of Bigfoot scream and going to a trance. And when they snap out of it, they said, I don't know what happened. It's like I was paralyzed and I couldn't move anymore. A little bit like sleep paralysis, but conscious.
Interesting.
So there's so many different types of manifestations that surround this creature. That's why it's so mythical in a way, because nobody has a distinct answer, like a definite answer. Yeah, I think, and I agree with Wes Germer, the host of Sasquatch Chronicles. If he's listening, hats off to your show, Wes. When he says, the only way we could know more is if we caught one.
Yeah.
Dead or alive, but and I'm not saying I want to shoot the creature or anything, because I don't think that's right. But on the other hand, capturing these would be very daunting. I don't even know how it's even possible. But.
Yeah. Well, and two, I harken back to Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know how much research you've done into Skinwalker Ranch, and a lot of this, them seeing all these cryptid / UFO / just supernatural things all in the same area, and particularly that one account of a Bigfoot jumping out of a portal or either into a portal. I can't remember which one it was. It was one of the two. And then, like, several years ago, before I got really heavy into the fringe, I've always listened to Coast to Coast ever since I was like a teenager, back when Art Bell was part of it, man. I mean, it just blew me. I love staying up late at night, and I loved hearing Art Bell. He was crazy, and I loved it. Anyway, but I listened to when George Norrie took it over. This was several years ago. There was they were interviewing somebody who had a book out, and I can't remember his name for the life of me, because I would love to read this book, where he was the first, I think, people coming out realizing that they're in clusters, that you see Bigfoot, UFO, and weird things, and even 411, like missing people in a cluster.
Yeah.
And here, a cluster here, a cluster here. And it happens over in the United States, but they all see them, even paranormal experiences like ghosts and stuff like that.
Is it Quantum Bigfoot, the book?
It might be. That sounds familiar.
There's a book called Quantum Bigfoot. I didn't read it yet, but I heard the author in an interview once. He was a very interesting guy. So he researched the paranormal aspect of Bigfoot and the portal related stuff, the UFO stuff, and that's what he specialized this book on.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kenny.
I was gonna say, I probably the most interesting aspect of Bigfoot that I ever came across was I don't know, maybe 12, 15 years ago. I do a lot of stuff with Skywatch TV and Tom Horn and all of them, but Tom Horn had a book many years ago called Nephilim Stargates, and this was before people were really starting to push the Nephilim Gen 6 stuff. It was a little bit ahead of what that people weren't really at that place now. Now it's everywhere. But I remember reading the book and the aspects of these Bigfoot creatures. He had things talking about them possibly being interdimensional, coming through portals. And the reason we've never caught one is because they come through and they go back. They never really here that long. And that's why we catch bits and pieces of them, or we're about to capture them on something and then they're gone. That they're constantly in this thing. And I always thought that was that's a pretty far out there theory, but it's as plausible as almost anything else is. Why haven't we caught one? Why haven't we caught one? Why haven't we had more video stuff of it? And I
Why
think
are there no bones? That's what I hear all the time. Why don't we find Sasquatch bones in the woods? Well, maybe
Well,
that's it.
my theory is I kind of lay it out in the book. I think they bury their dead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
They're
that's a good
they're that smart.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I think they definitely. I mean, the more you think about it, people think of them as being this. That they're being like they're kind of like a dumb creature, but I think they may be smarter than us. Just they are in a this kind of like almost this big hairy beast thing, but they're very smart and they're able to keep from being seen for so long. Just they have a hierarchy of power. They have different stuff with it, and you're probably right. They bury their dead. No one's going to find it.
Well, that's my theory anyway.
I agree with that.
Well, and two, going back to your book, which I want to bring out, the whole thing at the end, the penultimate, there it is, the penultimate aspect.
Yeah, well, I brought it too just for in case.
Yeah. The penultimate part to me of the book, when he is there with the alpha, and then he remembers his faith, and he talks about God and brings that part of the book was really cool, because that shows that, all right, because this is my big thing about a lot of cryptids and stuff like that. All right, yeah, they're real, but they're still subjective to Yahweh. They're still subjective to the God of the universe, God Almighty. Even if there are UFOs from foreign planets, which I tend not to believe, but if there are, they're still subject to Yahweh, who is the creator of the universe.
Yeah.
And C.S. Lewis brought a lot of that out in the Space Trilogy and stuff. And so the reason I'm saying all that is I tend to think that they're not really Nephilim, but I think they were a Nephilim hybrid experiment, like other things were, like Sarts,
absolutely,
Sarters or Centaurs or whatever, these different animals that were myths. I think they were just a genetic experiment. And there has to be a supernatural dimension to them if it comes to that. I mean, I've even heard, and you probably heard this, Sebastien, I've heard that they can communicate telepathically. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I heard that. I didn't hear many accounts, but I heard a couple that mentioned that they felt that the creature was communicating with them telepathically.
See, which reminds me of the Wendigo and the Rake, which is kind of the same type thing, and how they mimic and stuff, which is supernatural.
But those are wicked. Yeah, those are wicked.
Yeah.
Like, but the part in the book, and I don't want to use spoilers or anything. As much as possible, so I want to get people interested if possible. But at the end, that account at the end, where we should just say that it's more supernatural and has to do with Jesus Christ and all that.
Yeah,
actually came from an account I heard in a podcast.
Wow.
And where the creature said that same word, and saw it was a cross, and he said that same word. So that was so poignant for me. But the creature was hurt back then, and then the man was trying to help it because he had hit it with a pickup truck. I'll just leave it at that. But as I took that element, and I said, that's going to be amazing in the story. So I brought it in there because it struck me. I remember when I listened to it, that account, I was like, that's fascinating. And I put it on the TV because I wanted my wife and kids to hear this. I said, guys, you have to hear this. This is incredible.
Wow.
So, so I think where James says in the book, James, for those who don't have the book or haven't read the book or who might be interested in buying the book, is like the mentor to the main character.
Yeah, James Walker.
And at some point in the book, he says he believes that Bigfoot are smarter than people because they fear God, as opposed to most people, they don't fear God.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that I believe that. I believe that if God gave man dominion, and I believe that if we use our authority in a situation where it's life or death, or it's just like maybe we're being threatened by the creature, I believe the name of Jesus Christ could really make a difference. Definitely. I know it's been used against aliens in some instances where definitely it made a difference there because aliens are probably fallen angels or / demons.
Yeah.
So there were accounts I've heard that definitely the person was in the process of being abducted, uses the name of Jesus Christ, the abduction ceases. But I believe the same could be said of Bigfoot. And I have heard actually an account, and now we're going to talk about another creature completely different. You guys have heard of Dogman?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Dogman is another ball game completely. I think right now I'm more fascinated by Dogman than I am by Bigfoot. Because I mean, I've heard, again, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and accounts of people telling what they've seen, and let's just say that in the cryptid world, Dogman's the badass of the cryptid world. But you can, Bigfoot is a lot like people, you know, and like in people,
Right.
you have you have people who are a-holes, you have
Right,
people who are very kind, very, very generous, all kinds of people. I think Bigfoot, you got that variety of
Right.
Bigfoot.
Right.
Dogman, not so much. And
Evil.
it's interesting because even when you start studying Dogman, you realize that even there's these differences of, I don't know if there's subspecies, because there's the traditional werewolf, right? Where I don't know if you guys heard the testimony of Bill Snebelin, where you guys know Bill Snebelin at all?
I don't know if
Yeah.
I do.
Is it William Snebelin? Was he
William
a
Snebelin, yeah.
Yeah.
William Snebelin.
Mhm. He was
He
into
did-
occult stuff, right? He was
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was giving his testimony, and he was saying when you reach a certain level in the occult, and you want to keep moving forward and advancing and going higher and higher into obtaining more power, at some point you're given a choice. You're like, okay, you want to become a vampire or a werewolf?
Yeah.
And I think there's these
Wow.
there are actually people who are demonically possessed, who have the demonic ability to shapeshift.
Yep.
Yeah, that touches on the skinwalker stuff. Actually, they're like shamans in Navajo who've just given themselves over to evil, and
Yeah. So and depending, like you mentioned, depending on the territory, in Africa they can transform into leopards or lions. In the Americas, it's wolves. So it goes with the territory of where the person, the shaman or occultist, is at. So I believe there's that type of what we would call werewolf. That's the most traditional werewolf. There's an interesting part about Dogman that said that certain accounts that mention Dogman pups. So if they can have pups or younglings, or they can reproduce.
Interesting.
So that would make them mammal, some type of mammal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think, from what I've heard, that I don't think God would create an animal like that. But I may be wrong. Again, so there's that aspect, and then there's the government covert operations, deep underground military bases, experimentations of hybridization, which I think a lot of that's been going on, and they've been letting those loose for some reason. Maybe I don't know what the reasons would be. Maybe they broke out. Maybe they let them loose on purpose, so that the woods would become the worst place to be. Because if the government wants to hide themselves, there he is. Yeah, that's him.
I didn't recognize the last name, and I was like, no, I know who you're talking about now. So,
Snebelin, yeah.
That's a Snebelin. That's it. Yeah.
That's how he pronounces it.
He's German.
There's some neat stuff with that.
Oh, yeah. He's a great guy. And I heard his testimony on the Prophecy Club way back when. He had a lot of good stuff. But so for the Dogman, you got these three different types that you're like, well, what are people seeing in the woods? Are they seeing an occultist gone bad? Are they seeing some type of weird mammal? Or some type of government experiment gone rogue, or that was set in the wood? See, and that's another thing. We know that there's these DOMs all over the U.S., even in Canada.
Yeah.
And maybe the government more and more, and not maybe, I'm pretty sure that's the case, more and more, they don't want people going in the woods. So they might be letting these things loose more and more so that people stay the heck away.
Well, there was just released like the past few days a list of all the DUMs, at least I think in the United States. It was, I can't say her last name. There's that the woman who's pretty popular. Her name's Jessie. Starts with a C. She was part of the Illuminati, really high up.
Oh, I know
Y'all
who you're
know who
talking about.
I can't say her
That's
last name.
something. Yeah, it's something.
It's
yeah.
like CZTA, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I know who you're talking about.
Anyway, she released a list of all these different dumbs and like where they are and stuff. It's really.
And do you have a number?
Yeah, I can't remember how many, but I'll send that to you after the program. All you guys after the program just to check out. But yeah, and I've got a guy too that I'm going to try to get on my show that actually worked in one of those deep underground military bases, and he's wanting to come on, and so I'm really anxious to hear what he has to say about that kind of stuff.
Totally, that's amazing.
Totally buy it. I mean, there's stories of them just like walking around with different creatures down there, and it's just like it's not science fiction, you guys. We've been seeing this for years through predictive programming. They've been getting us ready for all this stuff through our entertainment, And anyway, so, but yeah, I have a friend. I'll give him a hat tip, Mike Stibbs, who's part of Camp Herman's podcast. He says it like this: we've been talking about UFOs and stuff, and I think all this stuff, Dogman, Bigfoot, any of this kind of stuff, it goes to something you said earlier, Sebastien, that if we say we're an expert, if we say we have empirically figured out and this is exactly how it is, and there are people out there, you guys, that say it's like this and this and this and this, and they're very dogmatic about, UFOs or Bigfoot or whatever. I don't think they're right. I think it's like you said that they say at the end of the Sasquatch Chronicles. I think it's it's out there. We don't know. Actually, the more I find out about it, the less I know about it.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. Yeah, the more you study the thing, the more questions you have. You're like, well, what about this? What about that? And it never ends. Right. And like you mentioned earlier, you mentioned the rake and the skinwalkers, and I think all those other cryptids, and some seem to be like demonic physical manifestations.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've seen a couple of quick clips of the rake here and there, and man, that thing is
scary.
Freakish.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
The mimic stuff is what freaks me out about it. Kenny, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, like you're talking about people to be like, oh, we know everything, end all of everything. I have a friend he's a fiction writer, writes a lot of fantasy dragon type things like that, and he's not a Christian, and he's not into a lot of the supernatural, but he wrote a book on cryptids that is fascinating because he kind of eliminates all the other aspects and takes it from a very realistic, like, could this creature be a real thing, a scientific view? And it's a really neat take because he's not approaching it from anything I would do. I accept the supernatural type stuff. He's not, but I thought it's really interesting because he has some really good points that people do not make, that he makes a little more scientific aspects, but it's an interesting book. And if just to get a different aspect on it, he's like, you're not going to like, and I've taught some friends to take the book. They're like, I don't like the fact that he doesn't like anything supernatural. And I said, you know what? To me, that's okay because that's his viewpoint on it, and it's his viewpoint. Is it right? I don't know. I know where I stand on it, but it's interesting to read some books from that standpoint also.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, I enjoy it. Sometimes they give you different insight because they look at when you look at this model right here. I mean, what I'm seeing right now is big 8, but what you're seeing is like you see an 8 and something else next to it, but you don't see the same thing I do.
Right,
and we're both right.
That's
right.
Exactly.
This same model.
Yeah, that's it.
It's good to read stuff like that sometimes too, I would say, just to get out of the echo chamber a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Engage the other side a little bit.
Yeah. I had some people I turned that book onto, and they were angry at me. They're like, why would you send me to read a book that the guy doesn't believe in God at all? And I went, because I want to hear it's a different perspective, man. Yes. I'm not saying right, but and I know where my value is, but to me, I was like, did you find it interesting? And they were like, but they didn't want to accept anything that was outside of that. This is my box. It has to be this. So.
Yeah. And sometimes as believers, we tend to do that, make that mistake of we over filter it with our own filter. And we think that's the only way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why I've enjoyed throughout the years to have conversations with other people from different perspectives, even New Agers, if just get a different, I don't know, sometimes it gives you insight.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes someone who believes completely different than
I
you,
agree.
it gives you like that little thing that you never considered before.
That's
That
exactly.
can add an extra dimension to your own understanding,
Absolutely.
maybe a missing piece of the puzzle in the whole.
Yeah.
And oftentimes Christians were very close-minded, and a lot of unbelievers accuse Christians of that, just that. And
It's accurate.
oftentimes they're right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
see that a lot.
we can't limit wisdom to, I mean, and Proverbs says, get understanding of all things, get wisdom, but it doesn't say from this book. Okay, I mean, we seek after wisdom where we find wisdom, and it also says in that same book, Proverbs, that it's a king's job to seek after wisdom. Well, it wasn't just in the book of Proverbs that we're supposed to stay. I mean, there's wisdom out there, and I think it takes humility on our part to realize that I can listen to a non-believer about something that knows more than I
Sure.
do. You know,
Yeah.
and that actually is, and that's why I appreciate a guy named Carl Technorib so much. I think I said his last name right.
Carl Techrib.
yeah.
T-I-C-H-R-I-B. Yeah. He's great.
Because
Game of
he's
Gods.
yes, because he's out there at Burning Man with
Right
his,
now.
with his tabernacle to the unknown God. I mean,
Yeah.
and he's engaging with people who are unbelievers, and that's what Jesus did, y'all. I mean,
Yeah, it is pretty amazing.
he engaged with unbelievers, but you have to be centered and strong in your faith to be able to do that. I get that, but at the same time, we can get wisdom from outside the church. As a matter of fact,
Sure.
we need to at times, and we get our little echo chambers and our confirmation bias and all that kind of stuff, and that's why on our podcast, Sebastian, I don't know if you've heard this, our famous slogan is, Kenny, what is it?
Eat the meat, spit out the bones.
Yeah. So, so that
you have a great shirt. You need to get a shirt to Sebastian. Your shirt, man.
That's exactly my philosophy.
That's it. I'm the same way. I love it.
I've been doing it for and when you enter this realm of fringe theories and conspiracy theories, you have no choice to develop that ability, because you're going to encounter things that are going to blow your mind every week.
Yeah.
So if you're easily offended, you won't go very far in your research.
And I will say this too. I've had people where, before I really was on my Christian walk completely, there was some fringe stuff, people that were not Christians and blatantly not Christians, stuff like David Icke and stuff like that, the stuff. Now, I will say this. I don't believe with a lot of his things, but there's been information I've gotten from his books that were so relevant. It didn't matter what his viewpoints were. If he didn't believe in God, there was stuff in it. Like I remember reading something, 15 years ago about Jeffrey Epstein that nobody was talking about, and he already had it in his book.
Wow.
And I was blown away because it hit me when it all came out. I had to go back to an old book, and I opened it up and flipping through it, and I went, oh, it's right here. And I thought, how did he have this information so far back?
Well, exactly, and I think David Icke's a great example right there. I listened to a lot of David Icke back in my day.
I did too.
And it was literally a case of eat the meat, spit out the bones.
Sure.
That was David Icke for me in a nutshell. And man, I really enjoyed his perspective on a lot of things. Now, of course, he's not a believer, so that was always a hindrance in certain things.
Sure.
But as for the rest, there was a lot of great information. And what I liked is they presented things that made me want to know more about that thing. And I would go and do my own research.
Yeah. And he kind of went through this whole stage where he kind of worked into this whole reptilian type thing going on the path. But it's really interesting is that I read other books that led up to where he got his viewpoint and realized that some points, like some of his stuff came from Kathy O'Brien. I don't know if you know who she is. She was like a CIA sex slave.
SRA,
I'm going to tell you, man, her second book talked about stuff. I live in Virginia, near Blacksburg, Virginia, where it's Virginia Tech, where we had the shootings and stuff. Well, when that happened, I remember reading one of her books one time where she'd been pulled out of the cult stuff and all the things, and her handler had her going, and they were driving past Blacksburg and Christiansburg, and she saw the thing for Virginia Tech, and she started having all this panic stuff that she knew she had been there, that there was this mind control secret facility in the mountain there. And then all of a sudden, we start having mass shooting stuff. That mass shooting at Virginia Tech is not the only thing that happened there. There's been things that people don't even know, but there was a Chinese student that cut his girlfriend's head off in the cafeteria in front of hundreds of people with a knife. And you start reading this, there was a ton of it. And you go, there's something there that was going on. And you go to that and you're like, oh my gosh, she was talking about it. I kind of got his whole thing with the reptilian stuff because she would talk about being sent to certain places overseas as, and she would have the information implanted in her and she would speak it out. But she would see these other ones like morph into other creatures. But she didn't know. He kind of went with it and said, oh, they're actually physically morphing. She thought it was more of a hologram type thing. And he kind of went with it his own way. And you realize that at some point, he realized it was way more enticing to believe in reptilian people than them having some kind of hologram. But you kind of have to have that information and read it and figure it out for yourself. Same thing with Bigfoot. It's, it's so much stuff there. Man, I just went off on a big tangent. I'm sorry.
But it's awesome.
I was going to say Graham Hancock. Man, Graham Hancock's, his documentary on Netflix. I'm actually going to go back because I think I remember him talking about some feathered serpent stuff that we're going to.
Oh, yeah. No, he's got to do it too.
Yeah. I mean, he's not a believer, obviously, and has still pretty materialistic view of the world, if I'm correct. Yeah. He's one of the ancient alien guys, but I get a lot out of his stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of those, and we have to be discerning as believers to not have this knee-jerk reaction. I like Rob Skiba for that. May he rest in peace. But he used to say that. He says everybody has that knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, I reject it because it's not part of my set of beliefs, and what I've heard my pastor talk to me about on Sunday, and what I've grown up to know from my parents or grandparents or whatnot. And oftentimes it's what we do when we hear something. And even all these years later, I still have to check myself sometimes when I hear a new theory. And usually sometimes I catch myself, I'm mocking it in my mind. Like, what a ridiculous thesis, or this makes no sense whatsoever. And then I catch myself maybe a year or two later researching that very thing and finding the nuggets and going like, whoa, mind blown.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the two big things that usually when I'm talking with a Christian who is, the red pill option is there, is what they're on the verge, on the edge. I say this. I said, are you a Christian? Yes. You believe that the God of heaven came down in a egg and sperm or whatever, however it happened, and was born through a woman. Okay, what bigger supernatural event other than God Almighty making everything from scratch? I mean, that's pretty huge in its set. So what's the problem with believing in a Bigfoot, or what's the problem with believing in a reptilian? I shared this with a guy not too long ago. I shared the whole aspect of Bigfoot. What if it's not, the missing link that you've been put across by, evolutionists? What if it's a hybrid that was created by these fallen angels back then, and it's been around for I can believe that. I'm like, I think a lot of it is how it's plated to people.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's all about our angle. And even when you present the gospel to people, it's all about the angle. Finding them where they're at and connecting to them to that level, on that level, and then building up from there. I found that, it's not necessarily that people are closed up to the gospel. It's people are closed up to your presentation of the gospel.
Well, they're closed up to the church and our presentation that we've done over the years of the gospel. And when I say church, I mean the universal church, and because we've had that knee-jerk reaction, whether from Catholicism to Pentecostal, we've had that knee-jerk reaction to different issues, and they don't have that knee-jerk. They're open to the supernatural. They're open, and I mean, I've told Lindsay this hundreds of times in our journey towards the fringe is, I'm not New Age, but I will give them one little bit of a compliment. They're open to the unknown, and they're open to stuff that we
Sure.
need to be open
Sure.
to, because we have.
Yeah, because some of the stuff, ironically, some of this, if you take the time to study some of their what they believe, the New Agers, a lot of the stuff they actually made bigger in their own way is stuff that's taken from the Bible.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we close our eyes to it, but they're so open to it that they blew it out of proportion, and we call them out and we're like, you're this and you're that, but they actually took it from the Bible.
Sure.
We called out on it if they actually knew that, because some actually do know that, but others don't.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, I want to shift things just a sec, because I feel like that one big thing about this is that the book. I think I'm flipped around here, but the book itself. I want to say this. I mean, I read a lot, and I felt that part of what made this book so great was the character development. Even if you're not a Bigfoot person and you're like, oh, the characters are so believing and real. Like you said, I felt like I was watching a movie as I was reading it. I was like, this is such a great treatment of it. And the characters, you believed in their circumstances, who they were, it all fit into place that even without the Bigfoot element, the story is amazing. And I think ultimately people like that, even though you get people who will come to it and be like, I want some Bigfoots. Well, you get your Bigfoot action. Trust me, it comes in there. But the story itself is just really fantastic. And I really bonded with the characters, and, it made us amazing. I thought that was a great thing. And I feel it's a thing that worked with people like, like with The Walking Dead and stuff like that, everybody's like, oh, it's just a zombie thing. But really the most thing was about characters and being in this circumstance that every once in a while you got a little bit of the zombie action. You're like, yeah, man, oh, they were gross. And But it was the people. And I felt this book carried that as well as anything I'd read in a long time. Like I was really, really excited about it when I finished it.
Well, Kenny, I got to say, this is probably the best compliment that I could receive.
Yeah.
Because for me, the character development was key to the success of the book.
Yes. To watch. I
love the characters.
Yeah,
I fell in love with them.
Yeah.
And I wanted people reading the book to fall in love with the characters as well.
Yeah.
And you know what they say when you're writing fiction, write what you know.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a family man, right?
Sure.
I'm married. I got 3 kids myself. And a lot of, his daughter, Carter's daughter, is based on my daughter.
I have a feeling.
I made no, I told Marissa, my daughter, I said, she's based on you. Ellie is you, basically, except for the different hair color. And I would read it at night because they were my first audience. So as I was advancing the book, whenever I was finished a chapter, I would share it with the kids and wife to get their feedback. And Marissa knew. She was like, Ellie's a lot like me. I was like, well, she's based on you.
That's awesome. And how old is she?
She's 11.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, and Sadie is based on my sister.
Okay.
So, and I even told my sister, she didn't read the book yet. I hope she does soon, but I told her, I said, you're going to see the chapter on Sadie, that's you.
That's wow. That's great. That's great.
So you write about what you know, and I think it makes it so much more relatable for people.
Yeah.
And that's such a great compliment because I really wanted to build that foundation where people would really relate to these characters and be like, that could be me, or that's how I would feel. Or,
sure.
Well, I want to piggyback on what Kenny said. In my reading of it, what I really enjoyed, and this goes just right along with what he said, is the authenticity of the characters. They were not hollow, they were developed. But also, I like to watch, and this is why I like Walking Dead and other stuff like that even, is the character development and how the big one for me was how Carter changed, and you saw his transformation through the book, and I could relate to him, and the fact that there was no what we call a Mary Sue, the fact that he throws some spicy words in there because that's real.
I did too.
The mild profanity was refreshing.
Yeah,
Well, I you know what? As a believer, as a Christian, I was a little bit conflicted about that. And you're writing fiction, but you want it to be realistic.
That's right. That's very real.
I'm like, man, goodness, there's some situations in this life that I know I've cussed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you just can't help it. and it's not, that doesn't make it right. That just makes it real.
Real.
There's another author who's a
Exactly.
Christian. His name his pen name is John Graves. I'm friends with him on Facebook too, but he has a series called Starship Gilead. I heard him on Derek Gilbert's podcast one day. So I started reading his book on my Kindle and stuff like that. And he had the characters really dropping some stuff, but he's a Christian and he's an amazing writer. And I read it. I went, man, this makes this feel so much more real, because they were like military and space, and they weren't all just like hunky dory. It was real, like space marine language, and you were
There you
like,
go.
this made it believable for me. Same thing with this
Yeah.
too. I don't, it's, and it wasn't like incessant, like it was over. It was like, this is who the characters are. They're gonna
Yeah.
talk like this. It goes like that. So yeah, I thought that was really good with that situation too in here.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like that we're believers, but we're human, and your characters, they have to be believable.
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. It's funny because people will talk to me all the time and they'll say something. They'll be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry I said that." I'm like, it's a word, man.
Well-
You felt it. I mean, I'm just looking at it like this. If that's what you felt and you had to say, that's okay, man. As long as you're not taking the Lord's name in vain, I'm okay. We're good with that one.
Yeah, exactly. And while we're on this topic, there was a meme I saw once that said that the people who cussed, how did they put that? And I don't know if it was scientific, there was any scientific backing
Sure.
of that, but he said that people who cussed are usually more trustworthy than people who don't. And
Yeah,
I think
that's their true feeling. That's
I
what,
think there might be something to that.
absolutely. They're not holding back on something. Man, this is how I feel. This was going with it. I have a friend who's in a really famous rock band. He wrote a song, and the big hit is basically "Go F Yourself." And I was like, dude, when it came out after 30 years, I went, man, I can't play this song for my kids. But when I listened to the lyrical content, we talked about it. He goes, I can't find another word that describes. And now here's the thing. What he's describing was government overreach, all the stuff going on in our life. We're being told we have to have this and mandated and vaccines and all this stuff. And he's like,
Yes.
what other word can you use that smacks it? I said, you're absolutely correct. There's no other word. He couldn't be like,
Yeah.
go fudge yourself. It doesn't
Well-
work. It doesn't.
Well-
It has to be like, this is visceral and it's real.
Well, in the U.S., that guy who's gone viral recently, he's like a cowboy.
Oh, Oliver
Yeah.
Anthony. Yeah. Singing
There's,
the song.
there's some
Yeah.
wild cuts in there, but man, it's so
It's so,
perfect.
yeah, it is.
I don't know. I don't like. I'm not saying I'm endorsing cussing,
Nope. No,
All right.
but you know what I mean.
absolutely.
Yeah, we know what you mean. Well, but he's
No,
getting
you
he's
can't,
getting
you know
backlash.
he's feeling it. Yeah. That's
He's getting
realism. That's
tons.
somebody upset. So,
Yeah,
No,
he's
I
getting
agree. I agree with
tons
that.
of what I call religious spirit backlash, though, for those cuss
There
words.
we go.
So, but anyway,
Mhm.
yeah, in my life, when I was first saved and then ordained, and I was the pastor and all this kind of stuff, I used to like wear this like badge of honor, like, oh, I walk in the room and they stop cussing, And you know what changed though? And Lindsay will tell you this. I'm at the place now where if I walk in a room and they're not cussing, if they usually do, I feel like I'm not doing my job because I'm not being Jesus, because Jesus was safe. And if you can't be safe around people and be yourself, you're not doing your job as a minister or as a pastor. They need
I know
to
what
be,
you mean.
You
Yeah.
understand
know
what I
what
mean
you
by
mean.
that? Yeah. Yeah.
The ability to make people feel like they can tell you anything or be themselves around you
Yes, that's
is
Jesus.
priceless.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm probably gonna catch
why-
I'm gonna catch flack on this podcast about this, but you know what? I don't care.
Can I tell you an anecdote that I think you're going to find interesting? It's related to the book, and it's a little different direction than what we were talking about, the cussing and all that.
Right.
But so when I released the book, I was invited by the Canadian Broadcasting Company, CBC in Canada, which is huge, but they're also local. So I'm in a small town, Charlottetown, on Prince Edward Island. So we're about like 40,000 people living there. So it's not a big city. But I was invited. I had the privilege of being there on the radio where they talked to me about my book, my new book. So that was fun because all my Christian books, they didn't want to do that for sure. But this one, that was okay, because it's secular. So I had a good time being interviewed by a lady there. And it was about maybe 10 minutes. It wasn't very long. But I told them here, and here's where you're going to see what we were talking about, government cover-ups. Check this out. The CBC is government sanctioned.
Right.
Okay, it's government owned and operated in Canada. That's the main news hub. It's the main place for Canadians to get their stuff, right? So I'm just being myself. I am telling the host about the book and how I came with the idea and all that. And I said, oh, interesting tidbit. And I'm telling you guys at the same time, because in Canada, there's some Bigfoot sightings. In New Brunswick, right next door to Prince Edward Island, there's been Bigfoot sightings. In Quebec, Ontario, and all the way towards the west. And in the west, it's like where there's most sightings, in Victoria Island especially.
BC, yeah.
But Prince Edward Island is this small island, right, in the Atlantic. And we don't have really any Bigfoot sightings. And she said, the host mentioned that. She says, we don't have any Bigfoot here. Thankfully, we don't have any Bigfoot here on PI. I said, well, that's debatable. I said, did you know that one of the top 10 best Bigfoot camera footage, actually comes from Prince Edward Island?
Wow.
And if you look it up on YouTube, it's called the PEI, or Prince Edward Island Bigfoot. And it was about maybe 12 years ago, something like that, maybe more or less.
Write that down.
There was these young high school kids who went in the woods here on the island. They went in the woods to film. They were doing a school movie that they needed to make. And so they brought their camera, and they're doing a scene in the woods where the protagonist is supposed to come running out of the woods screaming. So he positions himself, and he's coming out screaming towards the camera. And as he's running towards the camera, in the back of him, you see a creature running past, like running across the field. And the guy who holds the camera goes like, what the? And then he cusses. Right. And he like, you can see he's running towards the what he just saw, because he's like, what did I just see?
Oh, wow.
So I tell the host this, okay? We're in tourist season, the middle of July, and our island lives off tourism a lot. Mm-hmm. That's the only part of the whole interview that they took off.
They cut it out.
They cut it out.
Wow.
And it is no coincidence. And I told my wife, I said, it's awesome. They kept everything I said except one thing.
Wow.
That part, which is absolutely amazing. It was one of the best things I've said during that 10 minutes.
Must have struck a nerve a little too much.
Well, they don't want people knowing about these creatures.
Sure. Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I think I've seen that one. I do. When you described it, I was like, I think I've seen it come across. I just didn't know it was Prince Edward Island. That's
amazingly.
Well, I'm definitely going to check it out.
Yeah.
Well, let's. We probably need to land this plane here. I know Kenny's got stuff to do, and I'm sure we all have stuff to do. What I'd like to ask you, though, is the question that we ask all our guests. What is the most supernatural thing that you've experienced after you've been saved, preferably, but even if it's something interesting before you've been saved? So.
Yeah, it's after I've been saved. I was saved at 9 years old, so it's not really hard to pick something after.
Yeah.
But it's not on the positive note. It's more on the negative side of the supernatural. So I don't know if that's okay with you. Because I've got some positive stuff.
It's okay. Yeah.
So my wife was pregnant with our first child, a daughter. And she's about 5 months pregnant. And she had a horrible nightmare during the night. And it was awful, because I think, I don't know if it happened in the same week or on the same night, but she had a horrible nightmare during the night, and she also fainted because I scared her during the night, because like sometimes I went to pee during the night, but I didn't put a light on, and we met in the hallway, and she didn't expect to see me. So yeah, that didn't go well. So she fainted, and she told me, like, about her nightmare when we woke up. She said, I dreamt I was looking at my baby in the palm of my hand. She was so small. She was so small.
Mm.
And then I get up in the morning and I get to the patio door that looks out in our yard, and I see a black cat. But that cat is fixating me. And I know it's not just a black cat. I can sense something in the spirit that there's something wrong there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm staring at it, and it's staring right back at me. And I call Liz. I said, Liz, come here a second. And she gets to the patio door. I said, look. So I point to the cat. She looks at the cat, and right away she says, in the name of Jesus, go away. The cat turned around and left. A couple months later, we went to my wife's doctor, the one who was supposed to help her give birth. And she says, I feel like your baby hasn't been gaining much weight. So I think we should provoke you at 38 weeks so you can feed her with milk, and she's going to gain the weight she needs to. Just a couple weeks, but it would be safer.
Right.
And long story short, things went horrifically wrong. She was born, and she died 30 minutes later, not even 30 minutes later. They tried to put tubes into her, but she had underdeveloped lungs. So her name was Jennifer, my daughter. That was our first child. And so she had underdeveloped lungs, and they could not put the tubes inside her. They didn't know what was wrong. So we asked for an autopsy, and they realized that it was the lungs problem. So obviously recovering from that was a huge deal. It was very, very hard on our marriage. We almost ended up divorcing. It was extremely difficult, but the Lord is good. By his grace, we got through it, and now we got 3 beautiful kids and all that. But the whole thing, I believe, was a satanic attack. When looking back, you're like, well, something was going on. And, the Lord even revealed to me years later, through a dream, that there was dark Freemasons in the department I was working at that had probably brought this against us.
Yeah.
And he actually showed me the face of the guy who had probably a hand in it. So, but that was years later. That was actually maybe a year or 2 ago. He showed me that, and I was like, okay, so that's what happened. Back then, I didn't have a clue. You don't think, I'm a Christian. This guy over there working in my department is a Freemason, and he's doing imprecatory incantations against me or whatever. You don't think like that, because we're beings of light. We don't think like that.
Right.
But there are people who do think like that. They're like, okay, I see your light.
Right.
My demons don't like your light. I'm going to shut it down. I'm going to shut it off. And that's what happened. So that was a supernatural thing. Maybe a little bit on the dark side, and I'm sorry about that. But
No,
that's very. I had a similar situation happen to me. I won't go into details and stuff like that, but something with a child that almost made it to full term, and we lost, and it caused a lot of problems and stuff like that. It's one of those things in between the 2 children I had. And so it's really, I know, because it was really one of those things that's, you're really lucky and blessed that your marriage made it through that one. Mine did not.
No. And you know what? We know that was all part of splitting us up. And we often even remind our kids, we said, there's a reason why you guys are here.
Yeah.
But trust me, the dark forces, they tried everything to prevent you from being born.
Oh yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
That's wild. Hey, I want to add one thing before we take off and stuff. Hey, how there is something that happens in your book that I wonder if you're getting any flack about.
I got flack recently because of the religious undertones of my book.
I believe,
because in that particular genre, a lot of people are looking for the gore.
Oh yeah,
they want the heads flying, the guts being split open of people, and the blood. And when you bring in the religious aspect or
Sure.
Bible or
Sure,
Jesus,
sure.
they go like, oh, I hate this. He mentioned the word of God or
Yeah, you're
whatever.
Gonna, yeah, you're
So,
gonna,
but I tried to market it to a Christian audience as much as possible. But even then, I mean, you can be marketed to a Christian audience. Some might say, oh, well, he cusses.
yeah.
Some might say, well, he did this or he did that. I
Yeah,
mean, there's.
I heard that the author was like French Canadian.
He is, yeah.
That's terrible. What in the world? I can't read this book.
All right, one
Silly.
more question, and yeah, we need to go. But this Kenny just stirred up something I want to ask you. So, what is your next feat? And then tell us how we can find out about you. And we're gonna put everything in the show notes, but just tell us on here how we can find out about you, how they can read your book, how they can read your other books. But what's the first question? What's your next project? What are you working on?
There's a couple of projects that I'm curious about exploring, maybe again in the fiction realm. But there's a nonfiction book that's been on the back burner for some time now, and it has to do with leaders who don't have any followers.
All right, so where can they find your other stuff? And
well, they can connect. They can connect with me on Facebook, Sebastien Richard. That's my main name. They can find me on Amazon under Sebastien Richard, or if they're looking for The Siege at Simeon Heights, they can go find the book, and there's Kyle Steele there, which is the more burly version of me. And they can also go to thrivingonpurpose.com. That website is where you'll find the course on how to write a book, the course that Trish talked to you about.
Yes.
But thrivingonpurpose.com will do it if they want to see. The books are there as well.
Okay.
But they link to Amazon. So they can all find them on Amazon.
Cool. Well, thank you, Sebastien. Thank you so much for being on our show. I mean, when your new book, your new fiction book comes out, hey, do it on what were you talking about, Dogman? That's what you need to do.
That's funny because I was thinking about that. I was thinking maybe more.
And I'll have you back on the show for that. And I appreciate you being on our show. And Kenny, thank you, Kenny, for being our special guest. And anything y'all want to say before we leave?
Well, I wanted to say thank you as well. I really had a blast with you guys. I love talking fringe and conspiracy stuff. So whenever you want to have me again, I'd be delighted.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.